Okay, I'll call the meeting to order, please. This is the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, May 21st, 2020. Time is 7 o'clock. Please call the roll.
President South.
Here.
Trustee Peters. Here. Trustee Galgos.
Here.
Trustee Giza.
Here.
Trustee Hannon.
Here.
Trustee Evans.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Village Manager Francis. Here. Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present, Village Clerk Haley.
Thank you very much. We will, for obvious reasons, dispense with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll move on to presentations and public comment. Our first presentation tonight is the Auditor's presentation of the 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for the Village of Riverside, and we have with us Jamie Wilkie of Lauterbach and Almond. Are you there?
I am. Good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkie. The floor is all yours.
I appreciate that. Well, good evening. As indicated, we're here tonight to present the results of the December 31st, 2019 audit for the village. The goal tonight will be to briefly cover some of those key highlights, and then certainly I can open it up for any specific questions that the board might have. I wanted to start off by obviously thanking the team at the village. I think especially in light of current circumstances, to get through an audit on time and have it presented this evening is certainly no easy task. So thank you, Jessica, Karen, and the rest of the village team for really working through this as a team effort. And in light of those circumstances, we are happy to report this evening a clean audit and clean audit opinion for the village. So thank you, ladies, and please pass along thank yous to the rest of the team as well. As I go through this evening, I will provide just a few page number references to your board packet page numbers. So not the numbers of the actual audit, but I will try to reference your PDF board packet numbers. So if you have that in front of you, that would certainly be helpful. We'll start off by taking a look at page 18 of that PDF. And you will find here a copy of the village's Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. This is an annual external review of the financial statements. And for any unit of government, really the highest level external reporting that you can have. So there is about an inch thick checklist that the village and we as the auditors have to go through to ensure compliance with the stringent program. So we're happy to report this evening that the village did in fact receive that award. You'll see a copy of last year's audit award, and we will again be submitting this year's audit to the program with anticipation again of receiving that award. So I did want to point out and certainly give kudos to the staff and to the village for going through the process of earning that very prestigious award for financial reporting. Next, we'll turn to pages 21 and 22 of the PDF packet. And here is where you will find our independent auditor's opinion. As I said, we had a very clean audit process. So the village was issued what we call an unmodified opinion for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2019. The unmodified indicates that the financial statements as presented are in fact materially correct. And as part of that audit process, we are required to assess the overall internal control environment of the village, and would certainly be required this evening to bring forth to the board any significant findings or red flag issues. As I noted, we had a clean audit process, and so certainly I have nothing to report on that front as it relates to, internal control, red flags, and significant findings. So, again, a very clean audit process. If we move on to pages 24 through 38 of your PDF document then, we will cover a section here called Management's Discussion and Analysis. This is actually probably the most important section of the document. I know that it is a rather large document.
Is anyone there? Hello?
I was here. Yeah, my fire alarms just went off in our office. I am so sorry. I'm putting myself on mute.
Manager Francis?
Yes.
Should, while she's dealing with that, hopefully that's a false alarm, perhaps we should move on to the report by Director Malchiotti, or should we wait a moment and see what happens?
Let's go ahead and move on to the Parks and Recreation report, and when Ms. Wilkie is available to come back online, then we can continue with her report to the board, would be my suggestion.
Jessica, I think I'm good. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay.
I stayed late in the office, and I don't know what happened, but something triggered a fire alarm here.
Well, as long as it's not fire.
I think it was security alarm. Something triggered it. So hopefully, I picked up my laptop and stepped outside. So.
Okay. Well, welcome back.
Sincere apologies. I didn't want that blaring in your ears here.
No worries. No worries.
Thank you. So we were covering pages 24 through 38 of your PDF document, and as I said, this is what we call management's discussion and analysis section. And really, as I said, one of the most important sections within the document. It is really intended to be the executive summary to the audit and truly cover some of the key highlights and discussion points for the fiscal year, along with providing some of those comparatives and analysis to the prior year results as well. So if you haven't had a chance yet to read this section in detail, I certainly encourage all of our board members to do so. As you go through those handful of pages, I just want to point out a couple of key trends and highlights that you will find noted within that section. First of all, as we talk about the village's general fund, for the fiscal year ended, we were able to report about $3.2 million of what we call available fund balance. If we compare that to operating expenditures, that indicates about a 32% reserve. Right now, the village has a reserve policy of 25%, so certainly you have exceeded that minimum requirement for the fiscal year. As well as if we take a look at budgetary expectations for the year, the general fund actually exceeded budgetary expectations. An interesting side note to that is actually every fund of the village exceeded budgetary expectations for the year. So really a clean audit and some positive operating results as well. The last section of the document I wanted to point out is what we call the statistical section, and you can find that on pages 144 through 180 of your board packet. This section really provides a wealth of both current and historical information, and will cover a variety of topics such as financial results, revenue trends, long-term debt trends, and operating indicators, and really provides a wealth of information as you're looking for some of that historical analysis. So for our boards as well, I always encourage you to kind of flip through that section of the document as well. Really nothing else to report this evening to the board. I just want to stress, our sincere thanks of going through an audit in the middle of a pandemic and getting through it in such an efficient fashion, and really coming out with a clean audit opinion. So I'd be certainly happy to open it up for any specific questions, but again, just wanted to thank the village for all their efforts.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkie. Trustees, any questions?
I have what I hope is a quick and simple question. First of all, I am very pleased at that award that was described by Jamie. I think it really shows how diligent, the finance group in the village and the rest of the staff really approached this. So when I saw that in the notes, I was very, very pleased that they something that we can hang our head on for another year. Really, my question goes to the management discussion analysis, Jamie, that you were going through. On page 24 of the packet, which is page 12 of the Auditors report or the materials that was provided, the last bullet point on the police pension trust fund increase, I couldn't really understand the takeaway from that other than it seemed good. So could you give a little sort of more background and insight on what that bullet point means?
Sure, it's not a problem. So that bullet point is really focused on the results for the police pension fund for the fiscal year. And here it indicates a 19.7% increase in basically the equity of the pension plan. Most of that is coming in the form of investment returns being positive for the 12-month period. And so in light of that, the actuarial funding level, which represents your total future liability to the police pension plan, less those assets that you have already set aside, that funding level was able to increase from last year to this year. So really the big takeaway there is just the market returns related to the pension plan.
Okay, and that's as of December 31. So what's happened in March, is the decrease not yet reflected?
Exactly.
Okay.
And obviously most of the investment advisors are hoping we have some slight rebound before the end of the calendar year.
No, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Trustees, anything else? Well, Ms. Wilkie, thank you very much for the report, and it's always a pleasure to do business with Lauterbach, and we work very well together, and we appreciate your expertise and guiding us through the process as well.
Well, thank you for having us, and I do apologize for the hiccup here this evening, and hope you all enjoy your evening and stay safe out there.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll move on now to next item B, which is a Parks and Recreation update by Director Malchiotti. Mr. Malchiotti.
Good evening, President Sells, Village Trustees, Village Manager Francis. I'm happy to go through some of the highlights of our plans for the Farmers Market this year, along with some other events and programs we have coming up. I know during this time that everyone wants to operate in a safe manner and has some concerns, so I'm happy to kind of lay out our procedures and then address any questions after that. The procedures that I am going to lay out were based on direction from the ILFMA. They were developed by myself and Program Coordinator Annie Hanrahan, the Riverside Farmers Market Committee, along with our health inspector. They are consistent with other markets that are operating, including Oak Park, Hinsdale, Palatine, and Evanston. The market is actually not viewed any differently than a grocery store other than being outdoors, so many of the things you are already used to will be in place for safety at our market as well. All vendors, customers, and volunteers will be required to wear face masks. Vendors will also wear protective gloves. Market will have one entrance and one exit with one-way foot traffic to avoid crossing paths with other customers. The entrance will be monitored and control how many customers enter the market and how many customers are in the market at one time. Those waiting in line will maintain a 6-foot distance from one another. There'll be markings placed on the ground. We're also asking that families limit attendance to one member of the household when possible, and if children have to be brought with, that we just ask they are not left unattended and that they're also wearing a face mask. We're urging customers to pre-order products from the vendors that offer that option, and we'll be posting that information on the Farmers Market Facebook page when that's finalized. Some of them offer that option, some of them don't, but for the ones that do, we strongly encourage that because then you just need to pick up your product. It's a grab-and-go market. Credit cards are encouraged, along with small bills for exact change for the few vendors that don't accept credit cards. Vendor booths will be staggered with 10 feet in between each booth, and so no lines will intersect at any time. Vendors are being asked to provide 2 employees, one to package products and one to process transactions. Products will not be displayed on the front tables, and no one will handle products other than vendors. So products will be on a back table of the tent, while the front table will remain empty, provide a barrier, and provide space for the transaction. The vendor will then bring your product up to the front table, drop it on the table for you to take. While we will miss our music tent and our prepared foods, these will not be a part of the market at the beginning because they promote gathering. Hopefully, if restrictions lessen along the way, those can be added. All booths will have hand sanitizer visible and available for frequent use. Vendors must sanitize their stands regularly, wiping down surfaces and equipment. And of course, we're asking vendors and customers to stay at home if they are at all not feeling well and follow all CDC recommended hygiene practices. We will have increased signage and staffing to ensure all policies are being followed, along with ground markings to designate routes and line spacing. Of course, we will reassess all of these policies throughout the market and make any changes necessary based on the latest information. Did anybody have any questions in regard to the market?
Trustee Gallagher does have a question on this. Are there any contingency plans in case we do see a pandemic increase in the area?
Well, of course, we would work with our health inspector and Chief Buckley and village staff, so it would fall in line with whatever the latest mandates are. So if there's an uptick that moves us into a different phase or there's different concerns, then that would be part of the reassessment, and we would modify the market as such.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be honest, I had a lot of concerns about this coming back to force, just because I believe people will want to congregate on the parks, human nature, etc. But the plan that you laid out, I do feel a lot more confident now. What I am going to request, and I don't know if I make this formal, but we were meeting on the day after the June 17th opening. We were meeting on June 18th. And I asked for a report from you, just a presentation at the next board meeting on how that first day went, so we can hear how things went that first day.
I'd be happy to do that.
Would that be appropriate, Mr. President?
Sure. I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, kudos. That's the only question I have.
Thank you. Just some other quick mentions that. I'm sorry. Did someone have a question?
Yeah, I have one, Mr. Bacchiotti. This is President Sells. And I apologize if you said this. Will reusable bags be allowed at the market?
They will not. I mean, someone can bring in their bag and then take the product or the bag that the farmer lays on the table and put it in their bag, but there won't be any transfer of the bag. So the vendors will be providing either bushels or plastic bags, but if the customer comes in with their own bag and they're the only one in possession of it, they can put it in that bag.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about the farmers market before we continue with the report?
Yes, this is Trustee Gannon. I have a quick question. You mentioned that staff was going to enforce rules. I mean, we all sort of recognize, the issues I think all now businesses are dealing with people not wearing masks, not adhering to the 6 feet. Do you guys have sort of a protocol in place for people who are not complying, or is it ad hoc? I'd really like to think that there'd be coordination, with Chief Weitzel if there is an escalation of something that it's not a surprise to anyone.
Absolutely. I think certainly my department, and I think across all village departments, we've approached this as an education on why these things are important as opposed to enforcement of things. So we're going to go out of our way as far as within the signage and within promotion of the market to explain why these things are necessary and why they're in place. But certainly if we had an issue, whether it was based on the current mandates or any issue in the market, we have very close contact with police and wouldn't hesitate to contact the chief.
This is Trustee Evans. Hi, I would like to know if you have plans for how you're going to let the community know about the guidelines that you're setting for the farmers market.
So, like I said, we're planning on doing even more promotion than we normally do. So, through e-flashes, through the Parks and Rec Facebook page, through the Farmers Market Facebook page, there will be increased signage at the entrances and along all within the market. And then also, like I said, we're going to have increased staffing. So my hope is that the signage is there for reference, but really it's going to be that day of market, education and kind of guidance person to person.
Okay, so the e-flash would just sort of like outline all the rules and how everyone can only go one way and it's only one person per family. I think that would alleviate any kind of misunderstanding or issues that Trustee Hannon, might have been anticipating.
We will. Those will be out there. We will make a point of laying out those guidelines and then also, like I said, increase signage at the market itself. So it's in our best interest to make sure that the public understands what we have in place and why we have it in place. So we're certainly going to stress that. And then also, I apologize it wasn't ready for the meeting, but we are in the process of developing a GIS map as well that will be not only a market layout, but a route, and that will be also publicized and put out to the community. So when everyone gets there's no surprises as far as which way to go or what they need to do. It will be all spelled out beforehand.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
Ron, I have a question. This is Wendell. What do we plan on doing with regard to the 10-person maximum in parks? Are we going to move it to the street on Burlington, or what's the plan with that? With the limitations in Governor Pritzker's phases.
Well, as I understand it, it's more about the spacing. So, like I said, it would be similar to if Riverside Foods was outdoors. You need to wear your face mask. You need to maintain your 6 feet. All of our lines and all of our routes are one way, so there's no cross traffic. We're going to make every effort. We'll be able to control not only the flow, but how many people are within the market boundaries by monitoring that front entrance, so it will never get overcrowded. So those are the ways we would avoid congregating. If we needed to, if it got that busy, we could ultimately go to a one person out, one person in. But usually the way the market flows it should be kind of a steady stream. We're going to stress pick up and go, so there shouldn't be a lot of congregating. They would go to the booths that they want to visit, get their product, and then immediately leave.
Okay, if I can add to that, and Attorney Mars, maybe I can ask you if what I'm getting ready to say is accurate. As Ron said, the farmers market is operating along the same lines as a grocery store, so it's considered an essential business. So it is not. It doesn't fall under the 10-person gathering rule. I think what Ron just said is exactly right. What will matter is that we make sure that the traffic flow, we're always maintaining the proper physical distancing. Is that your understanding, Attorney Morris?
Yes, it is.
Anything else about the farmers market? Hey, Mr. Malchiotti, if you'd like to share the rest of your information.
Sure, thank you. And I know that you had mentioned this at the last meeting, but I wanted to just highlight some other things that we're working on. We know how important July 3rd and 4th are to the community. It's a tradition that spans generations, and it's certainly something we take very seriously in this department. The opportunity to celebrate these days as not only Riversiders but also Americans seems even more important during these challenging times. That's why this department, village staff, along with Friends of the Fourth, are determined to observe these events in a safe manner. Of course, the best way to get all updated and up-to-date information is on the Parks and Rec Facebook page or the Friends of the Fourth Facebook page. But I can tell you that right now we are working on a streaming concert option in coordination with Riverside TV for July 3rd. Registration is currently open for our first virtual Independence 5K with a commemorative T-shirt. So we will be observing our 5K run. You'll do it at your leisure and by yourself, not running in groups, of course, but you will be able to participate in the 5K run as well. And also, it wouldn't be 4th of July without our parade. We are going to have a modified 4th of July parade featuring our first responders, which will wind through the streets of Riverside. So this year we are bringing the parade to you. We encourage residents to dress in patriotic fashion and decorate their house or lawn, but to enjoy the parade from their own porch or their own front yard. And kind of a twist this year, instead of Riverside TV filming the parade, this year they will be in the parade filming you. So you have an opportunity to showcase your patriotism, any decorations, and we're going to observe the holidays that we all hold special in the safest manner that we know how. In addition to that, we are also working diligently to offer summer camp options to the community, both virtually and in person. And that's going to be based on the phasing, the mandates, working with Department of Health, and we will have a very specific plan for either option as well. But that's what we're working on, and will be coming out shortly. If you have any questions about those, I'm happy to answer.
Any other questions for Mr. Malchiotti? Okay, thank you very much, Director Malchiotti.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We look forward to the summer.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to public comment. Manager Francis, do we have any public comment to share this evening?
I believe Village Clerk Haley has one item.
Okay. Ms. Haley?
We did receive one email. It's an email from Steve Split, a resident of the 400 block of Herrick Road since 1999. And his email reads that we've had a few instances over the years where heavy rain overtakes the sewer system and floods our street, sometimes sidewalk to sidewalk. We have a floor drain with a one-way stop valve, and it prevents sewer water from backing up into our basement. In the past, sewer backups on our street have lasted approximately 20 minutes, even with intense street flooding. This past Sunday, May 17th, our floor drain was backed up for 2.5 hours. I would like to know why it took so long for our sewers to catch up. Our street did not flood until that final cloud burst was almost over, and our sewer was backed up for over an hour after the rain had ended. We have had in the past more rain than 6.5 inches that fell between Thursday and Monday. We have also had shorter storms that dumped more rain per hour than what happened on Sunday. Was there some decision made by the village or another entity to prevent our sewer system from emptying into a bigger system or the deep tunnel? If not, is there an explanation for why our sewers stayed so full for so long? Thank you.
So thank you for that. We are later in this meeting. We're going to have a presentation by Public Works Superintendent Dan Tabb, who is going to speak about the nature of our combined sewer system and the flood and rain event we just had. So I think that presentation will probably respond to that inquiry. So we'll move on now to reports of village officers. First up is my report. I guess all I can say this evening is it's been a tough May so far. Not only, of course, are we all dealing with the stay-at-home order and the the problems associated with the pandemic, but we also had the highest rainfall for a May in Chicago history so far this May, and we're not finished yet, and the second highest flood in Riverside history, where the river crested at 10 feet. And I just want to thank the hard work and preparation that was done by our village staff. Every single department was involved in responding to both the flooding and the aftermath, and everyone, I think, did an excellent job keeping their eye on the ball and providing the kind of services that our residents deserve. But I especially want to thank the residents themselves. I was out quite a bit during the flood event, and the goodwill and generosity and the mutual support that was shown by residents all across our village was inspirational. We received a number of calls from people who were concerned about elderly neighbors, that they might be having trouble with handling the problems that were associated with the flooding, and we did wellness checks on all of those folks. But it really showed the character and kindness and the loving nature of our village, and I just really want to say to everyone out there, and I know a lot of people were really impacted by this one, that this was an especially bad one with regard to basement flooding, and Mr. Tabb can address that later, but basically it was the perfect storm of having a saturated ground, having record rainfalls, having over 4 inches of rain in a 48-hour period, and then compounding that with overbank flooding once the river itself got involved. But like I say, we'll learn more about that later. So thank you to everyone for watching out for one another, and it won't be long, it'll be June. We can put May behind us. So that's my report for this evening. Manager Francis?
Thank you, President Sells. I wanted to also thank village staff for their efforts during this major flood event, specifically the Fire Department and Public Works Department. For those of you that aren't aware, we kept Public Works open till 1 a.m. Obviously, Public Works staff worked well beyond that point as well, assisting with the flooding on the different streets, and also the Fire Department early on Sunday, making notification to residents in flood-prone areas, notifying them of bringing up their different personal property up to higher ground in case their basements would flood, and I think that very much helped to be proactive on Sunday. So thank you to Superintendent Tabb, Chief Buckley, and Director Bailey for their efforts, and also the police department helping facilitate calls for service during that time as well. And finally, I wanted to thank Flood Brothers for coordinating the pickup of the flood-damaged items this week on Wednesday and Thursday. I think it's also important to point out that Flood Brothers has continued to maintain their service levels throughout the pandemic, in addition to providing us these additional services during this flooding time. There are other communities that are noticing a decrease in refuse services during the pandemic, and Flood Brothers has continued to maintain their service levels and is appreciated by the village. That is the end of my report.
Thank you. Let me go back, if I may, to my report. I was going to talk about this under new business, but it might be better to go ahead and address this now before we get into the other presentations. As many people now know, Governor Pritzker has modified his phasing for his Reopen Illinois plan, and he announced a couple days ago that he is now going to allow outdoor dining to start taking place under Phase 3. Phase 3 is anticipated to begin on May 29th. So prior to the meeting, I had sent an email to all of the trustees in anticipation of tonight's discussion about the possibility of the village doing all that it can in cooperation with our restaurants, and by that I mean all of our restaurants, to see if we can facilitate on additional outdoor dining. The response was unanimous that everyone wants to pursue this. We do have Director Apt and Chief Weitzel on the line this evening. What my suggestion would be going forward is if we can get a consensus from the board this evening, an informal consensus that this is the direction that we want to go and that we do want staff to work with our businesses to facilitate the additional outdoor dining. We can let the kind of the nuts and bolts of that fall to staff. It will be necessary to have a temporary use ordinance passed, and when I finish talking, I'm going to ask Mr. Mars to describe that process a little bit. So we will have need for a special meeting next week to finalize that. But so let me just first ask, are there any reservations or any concerns or questions about staff working with our businesses to facilitate this opportunity? So I'm going to take...
Yeah, President Sells, this
yes,
is
Mr. Hannon.
Trustee Hannon. First of all, I think this is a great development. The businesses, the restaurants here have done their best to hang on. I think having outdoor dining is great. The one concern would be, sort of noise after, a certain time. Given that, especially Lamara in that parking lot backs up to some residences, would like to see some sort of consideration on, whatever time, the staff believes is appropriate. They've got to start, sort of shutting down, so it's not in effect the same as a backyard party every night going on till 11 or 12 o'clock at night.
And I believe, and Mr. Mars, I believe you can add to this. I'm pretty sure that the ordinance that we will approve will have hours of operation in it.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, initially we were considering the same hours as you allow for the other outdoor dining areas, which is till 11. But if you think certain areas are more appropriate to end earlier, we can certainly do that.
So, Mr. Mars, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't mean to single out any business. I mean, my recommendation would be whatever time we pick would apply to all the outdoor dining. But I just think we need to be sensitive to the neighbors on, going to a late hour, given the fact that, some people will start to continue to work from home. Some people will need to get up and go to work as things open up more. So I just want that to be a sensitivity, as we sort of go through sort of this new normal.
A very good point. Are there other general questions before Mr. Mars tells us a little bit more about the ordinance?
No general questions from Trustee Gallagher, but I do want to point out I did talk to many of the chamber members, especially those that will be affected, and I've heard only positivity from this. So let's hope we can make this work.
That's great.
Thank you for staff and legal for getting together on this.
So, Mr. Mars, you just want to give us a little bit about the legal aspect of this?
Sure, absolutely. So this is, as President Sells pointed out, a new development. So it's kind of a fluid situation at the moment, with everybody figuring out the most effective way to do this. We're still awaiting more specific guidance from the Illinois Department of Public Health on some parameters. But initially, in looking at your code and talking to other municipal attorneys, I think it's probably most effective to set this up as a temporary use. Temporary uses require the approval of the board, and we're looking at setting some broad parameters on locations, what the authorized purposes are, what kind of things we'd be looking for from the businesses in order for them to be able to do this, and simultaneously delegating quite a bit of the detail work to village staff to work directly with the businesses and set some more specific guidelines in terms of health issues and spacing and indemnifications and insurance coverages and all those kind of things that we look for when our rights of way are being utilized. But you know, as soon as I have the consensus of the board, I'm going to start sketching all that out, and hopefully by midweek next week we can have a special meeting, have something in place. And in the meantime, staff is going to be, you know, working directly with the affected businesses on their plans and what their expectations are going to be for those businesses.
So if I may just ask a follow-up question about that. When you say that the temporary use has to be approved by the village board, you don't mean that do you mean that every single use would have to
we're going to
one ordinance?
Yeah, it's just one ordinance painting with a broad brush of all the things that we want to cover relative to this outdoor dining situation.
This is Trustee Peters. Sorry, this is Trustee Peters. I apologize I didn't get to jump in before Mr. Mars gave the detailed explanation of the ordinance. But one of my questions, and I am fully in support of this particular endeavor, but one of my questions is related to kind of the exit plan, and maybe we don't have that yet, but it's something I want to be thinking about with regard to when the phases change. You know, what will be our indicator of when we would potentially shift this temporary use? It's something to think about, because I think a lot of businesses are going to, and particularly restaurants, are going to, especially as the summer months come along, they're going to want to continue to allow patrons to come in for as long as possible and have that social distance. But I just want to kind of put that out there to think about what would be, you know, whether the next phase would dictate whether, you know, we would continue to allow this kind of use, even if as everything opens up or not. And I don't really have an answer to the question, but I just want to start thinking about that before we get into it. So.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Peters. You know, initially, our main concern right now is getting it up and running, but it is temporary, and so in terms of an end period, I was initially thinking about specifying that it would end when the distance restrictions and other Phase 4 type of restrictions on gatherings terminate, so that we're back to full utilization of indoors of the restaurant. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't make changes earlier or terminate it earlier or switch the program around if it's not working. But that was kind of my preliminary thought on when it would end.
So to follow up on that, so you're suggesting that we could time it to when Phase 4 begins?
Yeah, you could time it to Phase 4 or Phase 5.
And again, I'm glad we're having this discussion. This is a really good point, Trustee Peters. But the thing about the Phase 4 is I think you're still going to have the same physical distancing requirements in Phase 4. So that it might be, this is probably going to differ between the various restaurants. I mean, it may be, let's take Choo Choo, for example. It may be that when Phase 4 gets here, you know, they can have enough indoor seating to then they would not require the additional outdoor seating, and they would still be at the same capacity. But even at that, they're going to be at dramatically reduced capacity. Mm-hmm. So it may be that through Phase 4, you know, we want to maintain the outdoor option along with now having the potential for indoor dining until we get to a point in Phase 5 when things could actually begin to return to normal. But it certainly is I think this is something we have to keep in our mind. I wonder though if it would be just in terms of giving the businesses some peace of mind if we do want to set kind of a minimum date, like the earliest we would possibly go back and change something would be this, and maybe that we could tie to Phase 4. But yeah, this is a good discussion. discussion. Do other trustees have any thoughts on this particular question?
Trustee Gallegos, we could extend this temporary if we feel that we would want to go from one phase to another, couldn't we?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
This is Trustee Evans. Yes, I think that would be really smart to have a vision for possibly extending outdoor seating. It's very popular, and a lot of other communities or municipalities are making space, non-traditional spaces for this kind of business, for restaurant expansion, and it's sort of exciting to think about. So I agree I agree with Trustee Peters that we should keep it in mind.
Okay, so this is always the hardest part on these telephone meetings. So I'm going to assume that there is a consensus that we want to move forward with this process unless I hear otherwise. Going once, going twice. We have a consensus. So there you go, Mr. Mars. You can get to work on this for us.
All right, will do. Thank you.
Yes?
This is Director Abt.
Yes, please.
Just a couple things that I wanted to piggyback on that perhaps we could address along with this as we're moving into Phase 3 is other ways we can look into helping our business communities that are going to be able to, in addition to the restaurants, be able to be open to the public more. And if we want to look at possibilities of additional curbside pickup spaces being designated or potentially loosening temporary signage restrictions for people to be able to have more signage to let people know to call for curbside pickup or what their hours are and things like that on a temporary basis.
I can't imagine anyone having any problem with that, but just in case I'm wrong, does anyone have any problem with that?
Trustee Gallegos, no objection.
Hey, President Sells, I have one question. I assume this would be like a non-smoking area?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Okay, is that it? Anything else on this topic? Okay, thank you. We'll move on then to the approval of the consent agenda. On the agenda this evening is acceptance of the Village of Riverside's 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, to approve the voucher list of bills for May 21, 2020, to approve the Village Board of Trustees regular meeting minutes for May 7, 2020, review and file the Community Development, Fire, Police, and Public Works monthly reports for April 2020, review and file the preliminary 2019 crime report for the Village of Riverside, and the acceptance of Village of Riverside 2020 budget document. Does anyone need anything removed for discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
Trustee Gallegos makes said motion.
Second
Trustee
by...
Evans, I'll second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
President Sells. Oh, I'm sorry. We already took the roll. I'm sorry about that. Trustee Peters. Aye. Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Hannon.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll move on now to reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaisons. Are there any general liaison reports by trustees? If not, I have asked Trustee Evans to update us on our current census operations and how Riverside is doing. Trustee Evans.
Thank you, President Sells. The Riverside census participation is at 78.1%, so we have now reached our 2010 rate. However, with a goal of 100% participation, we still have work to do. Without full participation, our community will be cheated out of funding for roadways, schools, healthcare, police and fire stations, hospitals, and programs that aid older Americans like Medicare Part B. So in the next phase, we will be targeting outreach to Riverside seniors and those who speak languages other than English. And so the community engagement to connect with these harder to reach populations has been hampered by the pandemic. But residents can help by reminding their older adult friends and neighbors to participate. And we want to thank Dr. Freitas, RB High School principal, who recorded a really nice census video in Spanish being posted on Riverside social media pages, and we would appreciate residents' help by sharing it with their Spanish-speaking friends and neighbors. By the way, the census can be taken in 13 different languages. And lastly, I want to thank all Riversiders for their tremendous support of the 2020 census and encourage those who haven't yet participated to go to my2020census.com or complete the paper form that should have arrived in mailboxes in late April. You also can participate by phone at 1-844-330-2020.
Thank you, Trustee Evans. So now we'll move on to reports of departments, and as I mentioned earlier, we have with us Public Works Superintendent Dan Tabb, and he's going to give us an overview of kind of what happened during this past rain and flood event. Superintendent Tabb.
Thank you, President Sells, and good evening to all the trustees. In light of the recent rain event, I've been asked to give a brief explanation of the sewer system located throughout Riverside. I'd like to start by explaining the differences between the three types of sewer mains located in Riverside. The first type of sewer main is what we call a sanitary sewer. This is the type of sewer main which accepts discharge from private sewer laterals that exit a building. Everything that goes down the drain in a home, whether it's from a bathroom, kitchen, or laundry, it empties into the sanitary sewer. Additionally, there are many older homes throughout town that still have downspouts tied directly into the sewer lateral, which ultimately ends up in the sanitary sewer, only to exacerbate the surcharging issue. The term surcharging, as used within the context of this explanation, can be described simply as the sewer main cannot convey or transport the required amount of flow to match the rate at which the flow is attempting to enter the system. So basically, the inflow of water has exceeded the design capacity of the sewer system. The second type of sewer main found throughout Riverside is a storm sewer. This type of main collects all the rainwater that enters an inlet, also known as a street or curb drain. This type of main differs from a sanitary main in that it only conveys what enters it through a street drain, which is typically only rainwater. A dedicated storm sewer, even if surcharging, would not induce backup in a building because there is no direct connection between the storm sewer and a private sewer lateral coming from a home. Dedicated storm sewers typically empty into a body of water or retention pond, eliminating the need for processing in a treatment plant. The third type of sewer main found throughout Riverside and many other older communities, including Chicago, is called a combined sewer. This type of sewer main, as its name would suggest, combines sanitary waste and rainwater in one pipe. It's this confluence of the two types of sewers that may become problematic during prolonged or heavy rain events. Now that I've described the types of sewer mains within the Riverside, I briefly want to cover how surcharging occurs. The surcharging of a sewer system, specifically a combined sewer, begins in one of two ways. There may be successive rain events that occur similar to the one we experienced this past weekend, or there can be a single event that produces a large amount of rain in a short period of time. Once this rain, along with sewage from buildings, enters the system, surcharging can occur either locally, meaning that the localized system does not have the capacity to convey the amount of water attempting to enter the system, or surcharging may systemically because infrastructure outside of Riverside, which in this case is the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, their sewer mains and retention facilities are full and cannot accept the flow of Riverside's combined sewer. This scenario occurred this past weekend. Rain events between May 14th and the 17th filled up the storage capacity of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District system, ultimately rendering it full. When the heavy downpours came through Sunday afternoon, when this scenario occurs, the system discharges from what is called a stormwater outfall. Stormwater outfall discharges directly into a receiving body of water. Riverside's case, this would be the Des Plaines River. Even though the combined sewer system has been designed to overflow into the river, quote unquote, it may still not be adequate to sufficiently drain the sewer system at a rate required to prevent surcharging. This leaves us with the question, how can surcharging be prevented within the current system? The honest answer is it can't be prevented until the sanitary and storm sewers are separated. This process is expensive and requires extensive system alterations. That being said, there are ways that we can try and mitigate some of the effects surcharging may have on the system. To start, downspouts should be disconnected and allowed to drain onto permeable surfaces and in a manner that directs the water away from the foundation. By decreasing the amount of water allowed into the system, it will decrease the amount of water that is ultimately forced out of the system and into the basement. Some pumps that currently discharge into a private sewer lateral should be diverted to flow out and over permeable surfaces. Rain barrels can be installed which accept the water from downspouts and stores it to be used later in a controlled manner to water grass or flowers. Consider replacing a walkway, driveway, or other hard surface with a permeable surface that can absorb stormwater. With the realization that not all surcharging events can be mitigated through the aforementioned alterations, it would be prudent to take steps to protect your home from future backups. Consult with a qualified plumber that has experience in installing backup devices and systems such as check valves and overhead sewers. If your residence also experiences seepage from groundwater, a drain tile system or sealing of foundation and floor cracks may be required. Cheaper modifications, such as floor drain check valves or floor drain standpipes, while not necessarily a long-term fix, may possibly aid in reducing damage caused by surcharging. At the end of the day, there's no perfect answer or easy solution to deal with a problem that is systemic in nature and only compounded by what seems like an ever-increasing number of intense rain events. If you would like more information on the combined sewer system, you can visit mwrd.org under the Education tab. They have a good section titled Understanding Your Sewer. With that, I thank you for your time and allowing me to provide insight into the sewer system of Riverside. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from anyone for Superintendent Tab?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Stan.
This is Trustee Hannon. First of all, I just wanted to thank all the staff, fire department, the public works. This was not just an event that affected Riverside. It affected all the surrounding areas, and unfortunately, you saw the pictures from Lyons and Brookfield. So I think putting any implication that there's somehow a failing on the part of Riverside is greatly misplaced. With that said, I think the plan, President Sells, that I believe you alluded to on a couple of posts, that there is a plan on separating. It's a multi-year plan. Maybe at a future meeting, we can revisit that and, figure out, at least alert the public, here's the timing, here's the cost, and we're not doing this on an ad hoc basis, but we're doing this, pursuant to a long-term plan that matches the improvements with the financing.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Mr. Hannon. In 2014, the village had a comprehensive sewer study done. As a result of that study, 8 general improvements were listed. We've been able to accomplish the first 2, and my plan is at our budget discussion this coming year that we're going to revisit that plan and at least lay out what the current costing would be. As you point out, Mr. Hannon, it's in the multi-millions of dollars. But we can take a look at it and at least provide residents with the actual cost that would be involved with some kind of comprehensive attempt to, as Mr. Tab points out, to separate the systems, which is ultimately the only answer to this. Other questions from the trustees? Because I have a couple, if no one else does. So it seems like we had a especially bad backup this time all across the village. And one kind of prevailing urban myth in Riverside is that there is something that Riverside either does or doesn't do that affects this basement backups. The most common thing that I keep hearing on social media is, did you flip a switch? Because what people experience is that their basement will sit full of water for an extended period of time, and then all of a sudden it will drain almost immediately. So my understanding of why this occurs is that the sewers finally catch up and they are able to outflow in a way that they weren't when they were surcharged. But Mr. Tabb, can you address that kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, you're exactly right. In this particular event, we had through the 14th and 17th, we had a couple of heavier flurries of rain, and then ultimately the afternoon of Sunday kind of put us over the edge. The system, particularly MWRD system, they have containment, they have the interceptor, they have the TARP system, or also known as the deep tunnel system, they have reservoirs, and over time with these heavier rain events, these things fill up. And ultimately, the Riverside system, through a conveyance of pipes, it flows into MWRD. So it kind of has this stack effect that when MWRD fills up their reservoirs, then in turn TARP fills up, then their interceptor fills up, and then ultimately our large diameter sewers start filling up as well. And when those fill up, ultimately it goes to the outfall, which dumps into the river. And the system's designed that way. So when we have these heavy downpours, and it could be a localized heavy downpour, it could be a longer-term downpour or rain event like we had this past weekend, the large diameter sewers begin to fill up, and then we get these heavy downpours, and then the feeders fill up, and then ultimately the surcharge occurs and it ends up in people's basements. It will maintain the surcharge and essentially remain in your basement until the conveyance or the flow of the downstream sewer is able to catch up with the inflow of whatever was upstream, primarily from that rain event. So people often refer to this flush effect. In essence, what that is, it's just the sewer system catching up. When these systems were designed 7,500 years ago, there was never they were never intended to deal with as much water as they're currently fed. Whether it was the more common 3-inch rain events that we've had over the last couple of years, or all the sump pumps that, quote unquote, are grandfathered in to dump into the sewer laterals or the gutters, whatever it might be, they were never intended to accommodate that much water. So ultimately they surcharge. And, like you said, it's just the system catching up. And once it does, the basements, they drain in, sort of a quick fashion. But, I can assure you there's no switch or, if there is, somebody show it to me because I have yet to see it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And, I was taken by some of the mitigation options we might have. And if I could ask the Public Works Department to formalize those and provide them to the village board so that we can take a look at modifying the village code to accommodate those things, because this is the third record May that we've had in 3 years, and given the effects of climate change, I suspect we're going to be looking at more extreme rain events. So we need to do whatever we can do in the meantime while we're trying to get these sewers separated to lessen the effects. Any other questions? Thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate it. And thanks for all the hard work you did and the many, many hours you stayed up to keep everything going during this event.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So we'll move on now to ordinances and resolutions. We only have one item tonight. Consideration and action on an ordinance providing for the issuance of not to exceed $1.5 million general obligation bonds, Series 2020B, of the Village of Riverside, Cook County, for the purpose of paying the cost of renovating the interior of the lower level of the Riverside Public Library building and furnishing necessary equipment in connection therewith, providing for the levy and collection of a direct annual tax sufficient for the payment of the principal and interest on said bonds, and authorizing the sale of said bonds to the purchaser thereof. Mr. Mars, you want to walk us through this?
Thank you, President Sells. This ordinance concerns the sale of bonds for the renovation of the lower level of the library. And I know the board already knows this, but for the benefit of the public, I just wanted to reiterate why the village board is doing this as opposed to the library. So even though this concerns renovations to the library and issuance of bonds for the benefit of the library, our library is what's called a local library as opposed to a fully independent library district. There's two different kinds of libraries in Illinois. So as a local library, our library does not have any independent bonding authority, and they're dependent on the village for the issuance of these bonds. So we've previously gone through various statutory steps relative to how these bonds get issued, including a formal request from the library board to the village board regarding this matter. This board has talked about this previously on several occasions, and that culminated with approval of a referendum question on December 6th. That referendum question was on the March 17th ballot and was resoundingly approved, 73% in favor, 27% opposed. And so now we're at the next step in the process, which for the board at least is the final step, and that's the adoption of this ordinance. You have a schedule in your packet showing an anticipated sale on June 18th and a bond closing on July 7th. And we're passing, in this instance, what's called a parameters ordinance. So in other bond issues, we may have approved an ordinance like this, and then on the day of the sale, once the sale had happened on June 18th, we would approve something that evening that approved a particular buyer and moved us to closing. We're doing a parameters ordinance in this case on the recommendation of bond counsel. And our parameters ordinance essentially just sets forth certain parameters for the sale in the ordinance and delegates authority to the village treasurer and to the village president to go forward with the sale on a particular date. But importantly, if for whatever reason conditions are not favorable on that particular day, and that's a unlikely but remote possibility given the uncertainty of these times, it sets a 6-month period for this sale to occur. So if for some reason it didn't go forward on June 18th, the village's financial advisor, Spear, and bond counsel may advise for us to put it off a little bit till conditions look a little more favorable. And so this ordinance provides for that, and otherwise, sets the parameters of the bond deal, and has all the other usual stuff in it. So if there's any questions, I can try to answer them, or Director Johns can as well.
Trustees, any questions?
This is Trustee Peters. Thank you, Attorney Mars. Just for my own understanding, and anybody else who might have questions, what is a Series 2020 bond? 2020B, I guess, bond.
This is Director Johns. That's just our second series issued in 2020. We issued the 2020A series for the village earlier this year for Selborne Road.
Okay, that's our internal nomenclature. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the ordinance.
Trustee Gallegos makes a motion.
Trustee Peters, second.
Please call the roll.
Trustee Peters.
Aye.
Trustee Gallegos.
Aye.
Trustee Giza.
Aye.
Trustee Hannon.
Aye.
Trustee Evans.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye. The motion carries. We have no considerations on the agenda this evening. Does anyone have any new business? We have no need for an executive session, so I would ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved by Trustee Gallegos.
Second by Pollock. Was that you, Mr.
Trustee
Pollock?
Pollock?
Yes. Please call the roll.
Trustee Peters? Aye. Trustee Gallegos?
Aye.
Trustee Giza?
Aye.
Trustee Hannon?
Aye.
Trustee Evans?
Aye.
Trustee Pollock?
Aye. Motion carries. Stay safe, everyone. Take care of one another. The meeting is adjourned.